Hi everyone, welcome to this e-lecture on the reasons for the Cold War. Before we can even talk about the reasons for the Cold War, what is the Cold War? You probably have learned two important points in previous lessons. Firstly, the end of World War II saw the rise of two superpowers, the USA and the Soviet Union. Their suspicion of each other and their desire to spread its ideology led to frosty relations. However, there was no direct confrontation or war between the USA and the Soviet Union, hence the term Cold War. Secondly, you have learnt that most historians say that the Cold War began after the end of World War II in 1945. After all, the USA and the USSR were allies or friends during World War II, isn't it? However, by the end of this e-lecture, you will realize that tensions between the USSR and the West can be traced all the way to pre-World War II period. So, in my e-lecture, I will categorize the reasons for the Cold War into pre-World War II period, World War II period, and post-World War II period. As there might be quite a bit of content for you to digest, you might want to pause between the various periods to process and reflect on what you have learned. When you are ready, just come back to where you have left off. One of the fundamental reasons for the tensions between the USSR and the West is due to their different ideologies. For the USA, it had been governed under a democratic system, and they believed in self-determination and the right of the people to govern themselves and choose the type of government and leader that they want. In contrast, the Soviet Union had been governed under an authoritarian system of government. The Soviet Union believed that political power should not rest with the ordinary citizens, but centralized in the hands of the Communist Party and its leadership. So the USA believed in democracy and Soviet Union believed in communism. No problem, right? There's no reason why two contrasting beliefs could not exist side by side. So where's the tension and where's the suspicion? Well, the fact is they did not exist side by side peacefully. The West was suspicious of the spread of communism to their countries. The USA saw Soviet Union as a threat. Similarly, the USSR believed that democracy and capitalism was evil. Tensions arose as both sides believed that their own ideology was superior, and both desired to spread ideology to the rest of the world. Now, the fear and suspicion between the West and the USSR was highlighted in the Russian Civil War. You might have forgotten about this, but you have actually learnt it in secondary 3. Well, in a nutshell, Russia became the first communist country in the world in 1917. And in 1920, the Russian Civil War broke out between the Reds, who were the communists, and the Whites, who were the anti-communists. Now, the West were alarmed at the prospect of a communist Soviet Union and feared that communism would spread to their own countries from the Soviet Union. Hence, the USA provided troops to help the Whites in a bid to prevent a communist victory in Russia. Of course, these actions were seen as an attempt to weaken or undermine the survival of Russia and communism. So even though we all know that the communists eventually won the war, they would not forget that the Western powers had provided support to the Whites to try to defeat them. Alright, and in this cartoon is a Bolshevik poster or a communist poster showing 3 anti-communist generals who are actually the dogs of America, under the control of America, France and Britain. Now, even after the communists officially established the Soviet Union, the USA was unwilling to recognize it because it was communist. It only did so in 1933 when the Soviet Union joined the League of Nations. But they only recognized the USSR because by then, remember, major powers such as Germany and Japan had left the League, and the League needed better global representation. To sum up, seeds of distrust and suspicion had already been sown as early as 1917 with the establishment of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union itself was convinced that the West wanted to destroy them. In the second segment, we'll be looking at this distrust between USA and the USSR during World War II. Now, the suspicion and tension continued, and you will have recalled in Sec 3 that the Western Allies followed the policy of appeasement towards Hitler, hoping to prevent a war in Europe. The British Prime Minister even signed the Munich Agreement with Hitler, giving Sudetenland to Hitler. From Stalin's perspective, he felt that the West were being soft on Hitler, and it was actually a conspiracy to encourage Hitler to move eastwards to attack the USSR instead of Europe. This suspicion was further confirmed when Stalin was neither invited nor consulted at the Munich conference. As a result, the existing mistrust towards the Western Allies grew. From Stalin's point of view, he needed to protect USSR's own interests. This led Stalin to sign the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact with Hitler in 1939. Now think about it. What would be the West's reaction of Stalin's move? Of course, they would also in turn become suspicious of Stalin and conclude he is not trustworthy. Despite the Nazi-Soviet pact that was signed in 1939, Germany broke the pact in 1941 and attacked the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union joined the Allies together with the West and the USA in a marriage of convenience. That's because they had a common enemy, Germany. Now you will have recalled from your Sec 3 work that the Soviet Union was devastated by Germany's attack. It faced immense pressure from Germany and urged the Allies to open a second front in France. This means to attack Germany from France in order to divert Germany's resources and pressure on the Soviet Union. However, the Allies delayed the opening of this second front until 1944. As we all know, this was almost towards the end of the war already. This delay in opening the second front angered Stalin. He was even more convinced that this was a ploy by the Allies to destroy the Soviet Union. This therefore fueled the distrust and tensions between the West and the Soviet Union. Now, towards the end of World War II, when the defeat of Germany seemed imminent, the Allies held several post-war conferences to discuss what to do with post-war Germany. Now, the Western Allies had learned their lessons from the Treaty of Versailles. They did not want a harsh treaty to cripple Germany. Instead, they wanted to help Germany recover as quickly as possible. A strong Germany would be an effective barrier against communist expansion. Therefore, the Western Allies did not want reparations to be overwhelming. They also wanted free elections to be held in Germany. Now, in contrast, the Soviet Union wanted a weak post-war Germany. This is not surprising at all because the USSR was badly devastated by Germany during World War II. It wanted to ensure that Germany would no longer pose a threat to the Soviet Union again. Therefore, they were determined to punish Germany severely by making it pay heavily in reparations. At the same time, they did not want free elections to be held. The Western allies were therefore suspicious of USSR's intentions on post-war Germany. They suspected that the USSR wanted to set up a communist government in Germany. At the same time, at the post-war conferences, the Western allies and the Soviet Union also disagreed on how Eastern Europe should be treated after the war. Now, where is Eastern Europe? This map would be a simple explanation where all the countries in Europe near to Soviet Union, alright, or east of Germany are called Eastern Europe. Now, the Western allies naturally supported democracy. They wanted free elections to be held in Europe after World War II. What then do you think is the kind of government the Soviets want for Eastern Europe? Well, they wanted friendly Eastern European states to protect themselves from Western aggression. Now, this is not surprising once again because Eastern Europe is just right next to the Soviet Union geographically. So, this Soviet-style satellite government will be a barrier to protect the Soviet Union. So, the Soviet Union wanted to set up Soviet-style satellite government in which these governments would report to the Soviet Union. All these only served to increase Cold War tensions as the Western allies saw Soviet moves as an aggressive attempt to spread communism until it achieved world domination. On the flip side, again, what do you think the Soviet Union saw Western allies' actions? Another episode in World War II that added to Cold War tensions was America's nuclear monopoly and the use of the atomic bombs on Japan. I hope you still remember that President Truman used the atomic bombs on Japan in 1945 to end the war quickly. But more importantly, the use of atomic bomb was to send a clear message to the Soviet Union. What's the message? First, it did not need the help of the Soviet Union to defeat Japan. And this is to prevent Soviet Union from demanding a share of Japan as a reward after the war. Secondly, it is to show the Soviet Union that America was now more superior militarily as it now possessed the most deadly weapon in the world. Of course, Stalin was annoyed that Truman had not told him about the atomic bomb. Also, the USA refused to share the secret of how to make such a deadly bomb. All these actions convinced Stalin that the USA would use the atomic bomb to dominate the world. He quickly ordered Soviet scientists to develop a Soviet nuclear bomb, which was successfully detonated in 1949. Now, both the USA and the USSR possessed nuclear weapons. The USA felt threatened, and this in turn led to an arms race between the two superpowers, which would continue to the 1980s. In the post-war era, after Germany surrendered, Stalin began setting up a ring of satellite states in Eastern Europe next to the Soviet Union. You might want to refer to the map attached to your notes. For these satellite states, they are outlined in white. From the Soviet Union's perspective, these were completely reasonable. It was a defensive measure to strengthen the security of the Soviet Union. The USA saw this establishment of satellite states with suspicion. They were convinced these were proof of Soviets' plans for communist expansion. The USA was therefore convinced that something must be done to contain the spread of communism and the USSR. What exactly is that something? Do stay tuned. Thank you for attending this e-lecture and make sure you have completed your notes.